In this episode of the podcast, I speak to Sonia Lohman, who has directed 2 documentaries at this point. First one was Teach Us All, and the second and most recent one is called Black Boys. Highly recommend them if you haven't seen them. I think they are between Netflix and Peacock. You can watch them both, but I remember watching Teach Us All on Netflix in 2019, and I was really taken back by how well researched and documented the work was, the information was, and she'd put it together so well, especially being her first documentary. So I really enjoyed this episode. She's so passionate about social change, and her most recent documentary came out around the time that the situation with George Floyd had happened. So obviously a lot of light was being shed on racial discrimination and segregation and, the mistreatment of the Black community. But it was a super interesting conversation to see, who she was behind the scenes as an individual and as a soul. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Okay, so we're recording now. Sonia, thanks for making the time to be here. It's been a good few months that we've been talking back and forth on email, but I'm happy that we're finally sitting down to have a chat, because in the space of the time that we've spoken, you've released 2 documentaries, both of which are absolutely amazing. I think you got my email yesterday after I finished Black Boys. It was both of them were incredible, but after watching that one, I felt like it was a good follow-up message, especially at this time with everything that's going on. So first of all, thanks for making the time to chat, because I think films like that, where you can just feel the heart and soul and the energy that's gone into it, and the intention that's gone into it, you can't just watch it and then do nothing about it. Like, it's important to dive. It sparks, for me anyway, it sparked a bit more curiosity into like what the issue was, and it was surprising to see that it's still going on. Most people who are just living their lives, average day-to-day individuals, would just think, oh right, well, that was something that happened as part of history in the 60s, 70s, whatever. But watching that, it kind of brought my attention to the present, to realize maybe history hasn't completely gone. It's just kind of reshaped itself into something else, and so the problem's been moved elsewhere and shifted further down the line. So first of all, thanks for making the time to talk about that and so much more.
Thank you. I'm glad it resonated.
So before we go into all of that, because it's this meaty topic, so much to talk about there. How's this year been for you? I know we were just talking off air. It's been unexpected for all of us, but yeah, what's it been like for you coming into this year? And I guess, where were you, like, in terms of your headspace in January?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to, I knew I needed to see Black Boys through. Black Boys, my second film. But I made both films, Teach Us All and Black Boys, which are feature-length documentaries, as well as a short film I did last year. I went to South Sudan and made a film about midwives there and maternal health. So I've been doing all that on top of my full-time day job with an international humanitarian relief organization. So that work is pretty intense, as you can imagine, working in conflict and disaster areas. And then I'm doing all these social justice films like as my side hustle, essentially. So it's been intense, and definitely by the beginning of this year, I was feeling very burnt out. We'd finished Black Boys, actually, and I felt like it was this extraordinarily urgent subject matter. But the response was kind of like, well, racism, it's kind of, like there was this sort of feeling like, oh, that's sort of old news, or I don't know what it was, but definitely that people didn't really feel the same urgency that we as the filmmakers felt around this subject matter, and then the activists and the people who are all part of the film. You go to distributors and they're like, well, it's not Tiger King, so it's sort of like hard to get traction. And then COVID hit, and it was like, the industry just sort of shut down. And so it was a strange time, because I had to really kind of like keep the faith in a way. I had really, this film had kind of come out of me. I felt like I was responding to some sort of call, and then it was sort of just kind of wait for a while and trust that the timing will be right, or that it needs to exist. Like I kept saying, like, you know, it needs to exist in the world. There's a reason I made it. I don't know why. I don't know how it's going to get out there, where its home is going to be, anything like that. But there's a reason it came, you know, through me. And so, you know, especially during those early months of COVID when it was complete shutdown and there was no interest, it was just like, keep the faith, keep on going. And then George Floyd happened this summer and the protests erupted, and it was suddenly like, oh, that movie you made, look, you know, suddenly had its moment came. And it ended up moving very quickly after that. And we got distribution, and it came out, you know, at sort of the perfect moment. And it was actually kind of magical in a way to watch that, you know, how it was conceptualized 3 years ago. It sort of gestated. I was ready to put it out in the world, but the world wasn't ready for it yet. And then the moment came, and now it's, you know, hopefully people are more receptive to the message than they would have been if I had kind of forced it out there when I was ready for it to be done. You know?
How did you feel when you finally released it?
I mean, relieved, obviously. This one's been about 3 years. I mean, it took about 2 to make it, but with sort of the waiting for the right moment to release it, it's been about almost coming up on 3 years. So, you know, I felt exhausted and relieved, and again, grateful that it's kind of hitting at the right moment and that there's receptivity to it and there's been strong, you know, response to it. And it's sort of now a matter of kind of, in a way, discharging it from my own system, because I was carrying that, and you know, it's a subject matter that's not easy, and so I'm kind of now trying to like heal and sort of transform myself, I guess.
Yeah, because you put so much out. We were talking about this earlier, but you put so much of your energy into both pieces of work, and I'm sure everything else that you've done day to day in your day job, and the other small movie you made in South Sudan, that you need to find some time to recharge yourself, I guess, and to, what's the words I'm looking for, fill yourself back up with love, because you give so much, and in that moment you just feel like, oh, it's all pouring out of me. And that's the right time to do it, because if you feel like it's almost pouring through you rather than you having to do it as a chore, it's just coming through you. And the same thing with my writing. But then it comes to a point where I guess the universe tells you to take a step back and breathe, relax. You've done your 50% of effort, and now it's the universe's time to do its 50%. And that was part of the, you know, the platform that you got this year, unexpectedly, with everything that was going on. World events just fell into such a position that they shone a spotlight on the work that you're doing. And that was the other 50%. So that's amazing to see, because when I was watching it, that's what I thought, because I saw images and clips from different timelines, including George Floyd. So I was like, when did she actually start this then? Because I was like, it could not have been this year, because it's just, the timing was just impeccable. So that's inspiring to hear, that when you put something out there, it just works itself out, right?
Yeah. No, I started it 2017, and it was in response to the sort of the first wave, you know, of Black Lives Matter and the Take a Knee protests here in the US and stuff like that. And so, but yeah, that process is really interesting. You know, so I've obviously I have a creative nature, but my work, I only got into filmmaking about 5 years ago, and sort of without any sort of training or experience or mentorship or anything, education in it. I was always working in activism, and that is a very, like you said, it's giving you're of service, and so and it's a big kind of output of energy and time, and you have organization and you're analyzing, and there's all this kind of other parts of yourself that you're using. And then I decided to make the first film, Teach Us All. No idea what I was doing, just sort of did it. But I'll never forget that little sort of pregnant pause, I guess, between the two films, because I finished, like, I'd put so much into making Teach Us All, again, while working full time at the same time. And then I released this film, the first film, and I'll never forget, like, yeah, I mean, just sheer exhaustion, but like that sort of like, it's giving birth, right? Like they say that the creative process kind of like giving birth. So it's like, now I've pushed this thing out, and you have that almost like postpartum depression, right? Like you're just like, you're just like empty again, and you're kind of like, you're low energy and you're empty again. And I'll never forget, because I came back from New York after releasing the film. I was in LA, and I was just like, just an empty vessel again. And I just spent like 3 days, I think, just like lying in the grass, like just me and my dog, like just literally, like I was practically like crawling. I was so exhausted. And I lay in the grass, like down by the water in Santa Monica, and just let myself be empty, like, and it was interesting, because then Black Boys just like came, and seriously, like, it was, I think I had like 4 or 5 days in between the films that I like just rested and sort of just opened up again. And then the idea for Black Boys came, and it was kind of off to the races again. And you're once
like
again,
the universe
like,
saying, okay, she's watching you laying there on the grass. She's ready. Give her another day, and then she's ready. Then she's ready. Drop the idea now.
Days off, yeah. I had a long weekend to get over it. But
that's amazing to see that transition, and it followed up so well with both movies. I think they go really well hand in hand. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I think watching them back to back now would be great, just to see the full picture of where we are today. But with Teach Us All, then where did that idea start? I guess, what was your initial inclination? Because as you said, you weren't really a filmmaker, you didn't have any experience in that field. So what was it that kind of gave you the feeling to move in that direction?
Well, I had been interested in film. Like, I was starting to, after a number of years, I lived in DC. I worked in sort of the policy space. I worked for nonprofits. I worked for the social activism organizations. And I was definitely feeling the limitations of that in terms of, just the audience you might get if you write like a policy paper. It's just not nearly as widespread. And I felt like in DC, it's very like insulated, sort of people talking to each other in their own language. But I was starting to recognize film as like the universal language. Like, no matter where I traveled, no matter, where you go around the world, in the most, disparate places or diverse circumstances, they know American movies. Like, they know our TV shows. And it's like, oh my God, like, this is like our biggest export in many ways. Like, it's, this cultural, I guess, influence in a way. And so I was starting to kind of think about the power of the medium, but I was still very much, in that space. And so then I started working for an educational organization. And I just didn't know much about education, honestly. I had been doing international work, very fixated on global affairs, and not really paying attention to the inequities and the injustices here in the US. And then I just needed I wanted a communications job, and sort of started working for an educational organization, not with any particular passion for education, just it was a writer job. But as I started learning about education in this country, it really did, spark this incredible passion, if almost obsession, because it's just sort of unbelievable, like how unequal it is, and how that really sets young people on these trajectories in this country. And there are like certainly people who kind of make it through and defy the expectations, and then they're held up as these great examples. But for the most part, you're letting millions of kids fall through our education system cracks, and it leads to all these other things in our society. So I just became sort of fixated on this idea of like, this is like the preventative medicine. We're a country that like, waits till everybody's got cancer and obesity to start thinking about things, or whether it's poverty and violence and, unemployment or whatever. instead of doing the work that should be done when these kids are 2, 3, 4, 5, certainly,
Yeah,
early
that
middle.
yeah, because I've been thinking about education, generally, the power of education over the last few years, and it is preventative medicine. That's the best way to
Mm-hmm.
describe it, because
Mm-hmm.
it just empowers you at an earlier age to make the right choices and to realize the opportunity and the potential that you have as a human, but then the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
that's also available to you, should you even know it's available, though, in the first place. Like, if you don't know it's there and you don't know what you're capable of, you're never going to try. And then you have people who, I want to say brainwashed, but that's not the right word to use, people who who have a certain perspective or a closed mind to what is available, just because of the limited lens that they have, whether it's your parents, that person's parents, or the teachers. You just
Mm-hmm.
get born into a structure that was made before you were born, and then you just think, oh, maybe these are the four walls that I live in. That's it. I got to learn to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it. And education is what opens up your mind to realize, actually, maybe I can do more than what my parents have done, or what my teachers are
Mm-hmm.
telling me, or what the media shows me. And all the places we're bombarded with stuff now, obviously Instagram and social media and TV and all that kind of stuff. But it's if you don't have, I don't know, there's so many different things. There's so many different, education's one, but then I guess, self-worth and self-belief to feel like you can do something more, even though you're bombarded with all these messages. You
Mm-hmm.
still need to feel like, actually, I feel like I can do more. And then to think critically as well about, do I believe everything I'm being told? But you have to
Mm-hmm.
have an empowered mind to move forward in that way. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're
Yeah.
sending like these extremely impressionable, still malleable little brains into these settings for 8, 9, 10 hours a day.
Hmm.
It's the biggest influence they're going to have, really, is their schools. And if a school is a place that's not safe, where you don't feel like you belong, where you don't feel loved, where you're not getting, you know, emotional support, or even the development of emotional intelligence, all these things we're finding out are so much more important. Not to even mention, the regular academic, kind of rigor and curriculum and things like that. So I think the school is this really, the schools for me are so, it's really where this sort of racism in our country is very centered, So I think we're at a point in this country, in the US and probably around the world, where there's this sort of like, oh, okay, we're going to finally maybe admit that racism is a problem again, or, and then it's easy to kind of throw around these things like structural racism and systemic racism, and we need to dismantle racism, and people kind of are using these terms now, and Black Lives Matter even, and all these things. But what does that really mean? Like, what is structural racism? And so much of it to me is tied up in the schools, because you've got schools that were designed for white children, and literally an education system that for generations and generations and generations purposefully tried to deny Black children an education. And then once they weren't outright being denied an education, they were still, obviously there was segregation, but even after segregation, like even the way that desegregation happened in this country wasn't okay, now white kids are going to go into Black schools and Black kids are going to go into white schools, and we're going to kind of mix everything up. It was, we're going to put Black kids on buses, and they're going to have to go to these like neighborhoods that aren't their own, away from their communities, away from their families. They're going to go into these environments where kids are probably going to bully them and harass them, and the teachers aren't going to look at them with love and compassion, and they're being pretty violently like pulled out of their own sense of community and sense of belonging, and put in these systems that were designed for white children. So it's really kind of, I think the racism in our country is established and concretized through our school systems. And so then everyone's standing here in 2020 going, dismantle racism. Well, a good place to start is the schools. Probably the best place to start is the schools,
Yeah, because eventually they're gonna grow up to become adults who do something in their lives and input, have some sort of input in the world, and what that input is and how impactful that input is dependent on the beliefs that they pick up through their school years. Because you spend so many hours, days, weeks, months, years, like in London at least anyway, from my experience, I was in the education system until I graduated 21. So that's 21 years of being told what to do. Every year, like there's a curriculum set for what's going to happen every September. Unless I decide to do my own research, which you're not going to do that. You, as a typical kid, you're going to spend time drinking or going out with your friends or, going to the cinema or whatever. And then you go back into the classroom. So you're told how to look at life all the way up until that age, or 18 if you don't choose to go to university. But that's a long time still. And have you read Brave New World or heard about that book, Brave New World?
I haven't read it.
So in that in there, the author Aldous Huxley talks about the schooling system, and it's quite in there. It's quite extreme for whoever was reading at the time, but you can kind of see how it's playing out now, where they would play, the headmaster or the teachers in each classroom would play a certain affirmation for 7 hours on repeat to the kids, and their job is to kind of brainwash them so much that they only think about that one particular thing. So for example, it would be that they are made to work, and they would take out the element of wanting to go out into nature and play and have recess or break time like that. They just wanted to take that out of them. So when you grow up, eventually you're going to think, I'm just made to work, I don't need to rest. I mean, and then there's so many other things, but that's the time when their brain is malleable enough and open enough to believe anything. That's when we need to tell them that actually you can believe anything, you can do whatever you want. And maybe that's not possible for everyone because of the way, as I said, the structure of society is. But if people start thinking that they can maybe do something about it, then we could start heading in that direction, and then the next generation might have it a bit, have a bit more of a brighter or positive future, and then the next one and the next one and the next one. It's kind of a domino effect, and it's pretty crazy to think that this whole thing started many, many hundreds of years ago, and the beliefs have trickled down into certain areas, and the people that are in power to do something about it continue to hold those beliefs. So even though the masses may protest and think about things differently, the ones that are in power to do to make shifts or changes still hold a belief that's well past their time, well before their time, sorry. So it's, I don't know, you watch these movies and then you think yours and other ones like 13th, I am not your Negro, the James Baldwin one, and you get really emotional, but then you think, it can't just be me. Like, we have to make so many people aware of what's going on so that collectively change can happen. Because as a filmmaker, you can make, that's your input, to make the film raise awareness in an impactful way that's universal to everyone.
Right.
But then what are people going to do about it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I'm trying to figure out, and probably a lot of filmmakers are. I mean, again, being someone who came to filmmaking for the purpose of sort of social change and the raising of consciousness, it's true. I mean, I've been experimenting, exploring, I guess, and it's going to probably be like a lifelong thing for me. But because, I know I made Teach Us All, and I was, like I said, extremely inexperienced. I just sort of went at it like a kind of a writer or an academic, like, oh, here's a subject matter I'm interested in. I want to sort of dissect this idea of school segregation, educational inequality. And I kind of went about it like I was writing a paper, because that's all I knew how to do. I'm a writer. I didn't know how to make a film. So it was a very intellectual process in that sense. And then I felt like, okay, so then I got to the end of trying it that way. My first one was that way. So as I was looking at, the landscape, especially the media landscape, around 2017, when I was thinking about making Black Boys, and I really sort of started to center on this question about humanity, right? Because when I was watching, you know, the take a knee protests and the sports and all the kind of just shut up and play, like, you know, the backlash against them, combined with sort of like the somewhat desensitization / indifference, or at least a complete lack of like outrage towards the killings of Black men. I was sort of like, well, where is this, like, why are people not like up in arms about it? Like, you see a Black man being murdered on a social media video, and like, why are we not taking to the streets and like burning things down, you know, like it sort of happened this summer. But at the time I was like, where is the outrage? Where are the protests? Where is it? Like, how is just putting a hashtag up on social media enough? And I really felt like, yeah, it's super hard for people to connect with one another's humanity, especially when you live in a super segregated environment where you're just not around people, where that you have to learn about different experiences, and you develop empathy and these things like that when you're and so I was looking at I was like, well, do white people not see Black men as fully human? That was a question that was obviously really driving this. And so as I was trying to put together Black Boys, I was thinking, like, you know, there's a number of films that do talk about these issues, and they talk about structural racism, they talk about systemic racism, they talk about you know, unjust policies and laws and the history of this and stuff. But I felt like, but how do you connect to people's hearts? Like, how do you get to that sort of finer layer, that softer layer? Because it's true, like when you watch a lot of these films or you read about this stuff, it evokes kind of a anger / helplessness / hopelessness / like, this sucks, so we know, you know, this is terrible, but it feels bigger than me and I'm not sure what to do about it, or what is my place in this. And it's this kind of like intellectual / emotional thing, but we're not like really getting to the heart, I feel like. And so my sort of I guess challenge to myself was to try to create something the second time around, my second experiment making a film. Well, how do I make something that's really soft and really beautiful and really vulnerable and really connecting with the humanity of each other, not just talking about the systems that oppress Black men from the outside. But I knew this was going to happen.
You're fine.
Little
She's
bug,
bored.
come
She
here.
wants your attention.
She's usually good. No, she just doesn't know where we are right now. Little bug, come here. That's enough. Come on. Lily, come on. Up here. That's enough. Come on. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like, so how does it feel? Because I think that's where we get confused. And I mean, I get confused because I think it's easy to say racism was wrong and to have conviction about that sort of intellectually and ideologically. But where we don't often lean into is the just uncomfortable feeling of racism and these other dehumanizations and these separations from one another. It's segregation is just, like, to me, is just separation. It's like these different levels of humanity, or these walls that we put between us. And so it's, for me, it's a challenge in terms of, like, how do you evoke in an audience, right? Like a softness and a leaning in, not just sort of an outrage that kind of almost builds more walls, because you're like, well, there's fucking people that do that, like, you know, like those racists or whatever, you know, you could, then it sort of is like almost polarizes even more, rather than, I guess, sort of, you know, draws us together. So it's something, you know, it's fascinating. I mean, this is why I'm falling in love with filmmaking, because it's like, well, you know, I'm just on my beginning of this journey, but it's thinking about, yeah, like, how do you really reach people at that
It's connecting.
deeper
It's
level.
connecting people. Yeah, at the level that we're all the same. It's the heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
It looks the
Mm-hmm.
same, bleeds the same. We all feel the same about certain things, but with the mind, it's different. That can be programmed, which is what happens in the schooling system, which is what happens with parents and teachers and friends. But the heart, that doesn't change. So that's why when
Mm-hmm.
you see people watching particular clip or a movie or whatever it may be, it'll be very similar reactions every single time,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
at the emotional level, that's not coated by skin or
Mm-hmm.
beliefs or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it might be. That's not a level where differences exist really. But what was your answer then to that question of how in this movie do I connect people rather than create polarization or anger or outrage? Like what did you feel you had to focus more on this time?
Well, yeah, I wanted to, like I said, like, I think the sort of default of making a racial justice film is often, I think almost sort of further victimizing, because often you default to like prison shots and sort of a gray, drab, sort of hopeless color palette and maybe aggressive music that's like, you know um and so at every step of the way it was like, how do we not do what sort of feels stereotypical and predictable? How do we create something that we're talking about, like we're talking about the dehumanization of Black men, and how do we make this feel like a love story? Like that was what I told my cinematographer and my editor and everything, every step of the way. This has to feel like a love story. So the camera we picked, it's soft and it's warm and it's glowy. The color correction, even my color guy was, he was started coloring it. He started sending me back these images, and it was like harsh. It was sort of like, like racial justice documentary, like look, or whatever that would be. And I was like, no, like, and he's a white guy, and he was like, yeah, I had to, you had like had to check myself too. Like the default is to create this kind of like hard thing, because that's how we've painted Black men in this country. They're aggressive and they're hardened and they're just bodies or whatever it is. Like that's how we've depicted them. And so it was like, so how do we have this soft father-son scene in the beginning that's so intimate and warm, and those kids on the rock that are talking about crying at Coco, like, just like everything, or the dancer is like this beautiful thing, but it's juxtaposed with the hits of the football field. So it's I wanted to just create these kind of just juxtapositions, and this beauty and this poetry and this softness and this again sort of emotional vulnerability, those conversations, seeing big Black football player crying, like these things. And I always say it's not that those are like strange anomalies. Like a Black man loving his child is not like a revolutionary thing. Like all Black men love their children, or Black teenagers being geeky nerds that like Coco, like that's not like a strange thing. I didn't create that. It's all there. It's just that our media doesn't capture it that way. Our media, A, doesn't either show those things, or B, when they talk about Black men and Black people in this country, they put this like harsh kind of like hard palette around it. And I just feel like that just further victimizes the people you're talking about, and it further separates the audience from their humanity. Like, because you can see, as an audience member watching a film like that, you might say, oh, these laws are so unjust. But it's very different, I think, than watching a super tender, intimate moment between a father and a son. And you're like, oh, like, I know that feeling of loving your child, or crying at a Disney movie or whatever, like it's like, how do we see ourselves in each other? How do we step in each other's hearts?
Yeah,
It
and
was
I think you did that really
ongoing.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was ongoing. Yeah, because I remember one moment that stands out to me from the movie was when you had a few of those students in the room that you were talking to, and there was a bigger black student there, and he was larger out of the three, and he was like, I don't know why people are scared, like women when they walk past me in the road, I don't know why they're scared of me, because I'm the most like tender guy and caring guy that exists in his world and in his network. But people already have a perception that he's going to be like someone that attacks me, or I should be aware of a character that looks like this. And I don't think there's one answer to it. Like there's not one, it's not a single person solution. It's coming at this from multiple angles. And I think what you've done is just create a stage for people to then take action. Whoever's next in line, who gets sparked. The way I see this is like people are watching the film. You got the feeling to make it. You made it, you've put it out there. Now certain groups of people are going to feel a certain way, or maybe just one person who feels a certain way and decides or gives birth to another idea that raises even more awareness and change. And then it just keeps going like that, and just sparks of inspiration. And hopefully that continues. One thing I'm curious about is, how did your perception of humans generally change, you and your team, before making the film and then after you'd finished?
I mean, so one of the things, I was exploring through making Black Boys was my own conditioning as a white woman to fear Black men. And so it was about probably more than even halfway. I was well into like probably a year of making Teach Us All when I realized that I had gone to a segregated school, and I started to unpackage that, because a lot of people were like, why are you making this film? It's a Black issue. Segregation's a Black issue. And I would say it's an American issue. But even still, I didn't think about my school as segregated. I was still thinking Black schools are segregated. That's how we talk about this in this country. And so I was like, wait, I went to a segregated school. My school was like all white, and my neighborhoods were all white. And so then I started thinking about like, well, what does that do to white children to be totally insulated in these little bubbles of privilege? And what does that mean that we miss out on other people's humanity? And so I sort of thinking about that, like, and that was probably what, I don't know, like my late 20s, early 30s, I guess, when I was making that film. And I started going to neighborhoods in South LA or, the Bronx or whatever that were different from the neighborhoods I grew up in. And I would see Black men, and I started to become aware of this sort of discomfort around Black men, that was always there, but I didn't have awareness around it until I started to question this, like think about this of humanity. And so I traveled the world. I went all over the place. I was a human rights activist, a social justice person, like progressive and all these things. And I'm suddenly like, probably early 30s by that point, or I don't even know, but I was like, oh my God, I'm a little bit afraid of Black men. Like, and not in like this, obviously, oh, I love Obama, like we can say that, and it's like, sure, like maybe we all have like one, Black friend or whatever it is, but it was like, wait a minute, like I've spent my whole life in these white little bubbles, not even thinking anything of that, just how my world looked. And I was, I would move to new cities, and they would tell me, people would say things like, don't go to that neighborhood, it's a bad neighborhood. And I would not even think twice about it. Like, oh yeah, I'm not going to go to that neighborhood. You don't like think, well, what do they mean by bad? And the coding of that language that just permeates and permeates and permeates, that you're not even thinking about it. You're just, I'm not going to go to that neighborhood, or I'm going to roll up my windows when I'm in that neighborhood, or if I see a person that looks like that, I'm just going to look that way and cross the street and not even think about it. You know what I mean? So it's like, when I started to notice that dissonance in myself between like the way I wanted to see the world, and I thought I saw the world, and then the reality that was like in my physiology and my body, that was largely unconscious until I started to bring it into my awareness. And then I could see like, oh, I'm one of those people that would never think of myself as a racist, and yet my body's tensing up when I see a Black man. You know, I'm not going to say the N-word to him, but I'm going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, like I'm being threatened somehow. Like it's this very like subtle sort of thing in the back of your mind that you don't really notice, but you change your behavior a little bit. So I knew that I was starting to unpackage that with making Black boys. I knew I wanted to confront that, because that fear, I think, is the source of the dehumanization. Because, you know, because it's like, how can we watch Black men be killed and feel, you know, a little bit like white people feel like, again, not taking to the streets, not as outraged, especially this is, you know, 3 years ago, this is pre-George Floyd protests. And so I wanted to really like talk about that fear. I wanted to decondition it and then retrain myself, like unlearn it and sort of relearn a new way of being. So I realized, because it's at a physiological level in this country, because we're in a culture that's so fervently in denial about racism, especially if you're a liberal or a moderate person in this country, and especially even if you're a conservative in this country, very few people are going to like outwardly admit that they're racist, you know? And so there's like, this is like a no-go zone. You won't talk about the physiology of racism, the sort of the way that we move around each other. We'll just say, no, I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist. And so, you know, but I started to realize that even me being, you know, as enlightened as I thought I was complicit in the dehumanization by just these very subtle eye aversions, or, you know, walk to the other side of the street, or whatever it would be. So this is a really long way of answering your question, that I think that what it taught me, or, you know, it wasn't so much like, it wasn't like a surprise at all, like, oh, you know, Black men have feelings and they're fathers and they feel pain and they feel love and they feel joy. Like, it was very easy to, like, you know, acknowledge the sort of spectrum of emotions that every human being feels. But it really did sort of clue me into the way that like fear does kind of keep us from our full humanity and from recognizing the full humanity, whether it's a kind of a more overt fear, like with Black men, or maybe it's just a fear of something that's unknown. It's a fear of an uncomfortable conversation where you're going to feel vulnerable and kind of exposed, whatever it is. Like, you know, they're going to, you know, keep us from, like you've been saying, connected, the kind of like the heart level. And so it was an interesting experiment through making the film of, you know, having these super kind of emotional, cathartic conversations that were vulnerable and could be uncomfortable, but they weren't, because once you start to just like have that kind of honesty, it really is actually really, I don't know if rewarding is the right word, but it's rich. Like there's so much there when you're not connecting, but
there's a lot of depth. You feel the depth, basically.
Yeah, but you have to get away from the concepts of the other person. Like, you have to be like a open sponge, willing to like listen and absorb somebody else, rather than coming at people with
all your filters. Yeah, exactly. That's what I've realized over the, you know, through my own journey and just reflection and experiences, is we all have a certain level of filters. There may not be racism in certain parts of the world, but they're still led by trauma that's subconsciously there, and you see the world through that. You make your decisions through that. You make your choices through that. Your beliefs through that, and the actions that you take are all based on that as well. So that's why it's important to take some time to reflect and just realize that you're not a exception to being human. You're gonna face all of these things and be a part of maybe not a racism problem, but another type of problem. No matter how small or big other people perceive it, it's still something that can cause a disconnect between two human beings, right? Like if you're getting angry at your child for being a certain way, that's only because your parents or someone, one of your teachers when you were their age were acting in a certain way and told you not to be that way, and so then you inflict that on your child. That's not to do with racism, it's to do with the way you were brought up. But that child would then grow up feeling hurt and not loved and feel like they can't act a certain way, and so that's one part of their heart closed off, and they're only left with a few other doors that are left open. And we all do that. And I think one thing for me at least is this year, I know it's caused a lot of chaos for people and upset, but it's given people a chance to slow down and really reflect as well, especially those who are holding on to jobs and who've had a crazy busy lifestyle, are able to just slow down, spend more time with their family and reflect on the things that are important and that are going on in the world. So yeah, interesting year so far. What do you think is gonna come for you next in terms of filmmaking? Have you got any ideas bouncing around in your mind at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, as of yesterday, actually, I've decided on my next project, but it's still a little secret. But I think, this kind of exactly what you said. I mean, the thing I'm looking for, right, in all of this is love. It's like like you said, we're always kind of reacting out of our pain and our fear and our trauma. But then the higher kind of state is love, right? And that's what we're all sort of seeking and looking to receive and learning how to give it better and all of these things. So, Black Boys was really about love. And I kind of decided in making that everything I do is going to be in service of love. Maybe even more than justice, I think. Justice is important, and it's a concept, but I think love is the thing that's driving me, actually. And so I want to make things about love, and I also really want to do stuff like that's scripted as well, like, because I feel like that would be another next challenge for me. Like, what would it be like to work with actors? And I love writing, so writing dialogue and stuff like that. So I'm going to do a love story, sort of against a timely social justice-y background, but it's going to be like, scripted and work with actors and stuff like that. So I've decided that's the next thing for me. And also I'm working on a book about my own romantic history and spiritual questions and love.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned that in the email, and I was I'm looking forward to reading that, because it's interesting to dive into the mind and the heart of someone who cares about these sorts of things. Like, it just shows through your work that to produce work in the way that you have, it must mean that your mind and your heart is tuned into a particular frequency or a particular way of thinking or a particular way of feeling. And so I think a book is a great way to uncover all of that and let people in a way that maybe a film can't, or in a way that a conversation with someone day to day can't. I know for me, at least, putting together the work that I've shared with you, the draft version, that's not something you talk about day to day. Like, I'm not just gonna come and talk to you about, how's your day going? Oh, do you love yourself, by the way? It's just like it's something you don't wear as a trophy. It's a place where you can open up and express, like, just the way you express through film. I think, like, I have a way of expressing myself through words, a place that I feel comfortable and creative and open, and it comes naturally. So for you, I'm excited to see the film and to hear about the book. But what sorts of questions have been on your mind the last few years, would you say, in terms of, I don't know, take that how you will. What sorts of questions have been not necessarily to do with the film, but just generally in your own life?
I'm very interested in, and I have I studied women's rights. I'm very interested in gender stuff. That's actually probably my biggest passion. And the racism was kind of an interesting little, like, oh, like I got, you know, really focused on that. But it's definitely kind of gender relations, gender inequality, these things like that are the thing that I think about a lot, at the macro level and at the, you know, complete micro level, obviously, in terms of my own romantic relationships and things like that. So, you know, I'm very interested in the masculine and the feminine, like the divine version of those, and what we're seeing happen in the world, you know, as an expression of either the kind of corrupt, you know, corruption of those energies, you know, patriarchy. I think a lot about kind of the structures of patriarchy and the breakdown of that, that I think we're witnessing now, and just how to show up in the world, you know, as a man, as a woman, in relation to each other, how to bring those masculine and feminine energies into balance within one whole human being. So I think a lot about that. I mean, I'm very spiritual in the sense of thinking about how we're looking for God, how we're looking for wholeness and completion, and how often we maybe look for those in the wrong places when we're, you know, I mean, that's kind of the thesis of my book, my sort of memoir, is that too, like, it's kind of on the surface Confessions of a Love Addict, but at its deeper level, it's really that, you know, we use these addictions, whether they're, you know, substances, or whether they're romantic relationships, or or food, or a number of things, and often we're looking for God in a way, or whatever you call God, but we're looking for that sense of wholeness and that sense of completeness and that sense of safety and belonging. And so, yeah, I mean, I think about the ways that so many romantic relationships are breaking down, and, you know, how sort of tenuous these relationships are, and what that means for children who grew up in households of men and women fighting, and we carry that on, and I grew up in that, and how do we stop this cycle, you know? So I think about these things a lot.
What do you think what do you see as the biggest disconnect in a relationship?
Well, that is the question, right?
Well, your version of the answer. Obviously, there's different answers depending on what your experiences have been, of course. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Gosh, I mean, again, I feel like a lot of it comes to fear, right? Like when I look at my parents, when I think about some of my relationship patterns, whether, you know, you can do a psychology analysis of any relationship, and you could talk about attachment styles, and you could talk about, you know, avoidant or codependent, or whatever. But I feel like when I feel into it, like, you know, with my own parents or other couples I see and stuff like that, I mean, the heart of it is it kind of, again, always comes back to this fear of this fear of not being loved, fear of not being enough, and then we come up with all these other convoluted excuses for that, or like, you know, you're causing it in me, or you're not doing that right, or whatever it is. But it's like, you know, I think about my own parents, right? Like because I moved back home, and, you know, growing up, I saw this like anger and fighting, and it was volatile, and it was scary. And then as an adult, I'm like, these are just two people who are scared, and they don't know how to talk to each other. You know, they don't know how to cross that chasm. Like, we all feel this like fear of crossing this chasm between us, and not really sure how to do that often. And you've got, you know, two sort of lonely, scared people that are presenting like angry, irrational people. But I don't know. I think
They're all grown kids. Even when I look at my parents, I just think you're just grown kids. And you kind of feel this level of compassion, because I've similar sort of situation with anger and frustration and blaming and, you know, all of those sorts of things. But when you step back and try not to get emotionally involved and you just look at it objectively, you think, actually, these are just two kids who are they're lost themselves. They're asking questions themselves. They're trying to figure it out themselves. Because you look at adults and whether it's parents or siblings that you have older than your teachers, you look at them as an authority figure and believe they have all the answers. Like what they say must be true, like how they act must be true. And you don't outwardly say it, but subconsciously you start believing it, and you replicate the behavior as you grow and go through life yourself in particular situations, especially relationships. So I think that's why it's important to have someone who is as consciously aware as you are. That's what kind of helps more than how the person looks and, you know, how old they are or what like skin color they are or culture they come from. Like, none, to me anyway, none of that stuff really matters. It's more about how consciously aware is this person, and from that place you can do anything, because that person is just open to change, to create new things, to destroy old things, to destroy new things and create new things again. It's just like constantly adapting and evolving and being open. That's, from my experience, would be something that would help all of us, not just in an intimate relationship, but as friends, as siblings, parents, sons, daughters, all that kind of stuff. And that's the very kind of bird's eye, high level stuff. That's beyond like all the culture and tradition, what part of the world you come from and what gender you are and what skin color you are. All of those things are so petty when you look at it from that lens, right?
No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the thing about like every one of us having like this 4 or 5 year old inside of us that's wounded and hasn't been healed, and so I've been learning a lot about, whether it's from a psychology standpoint or a Buddhist standpoint or whatever, that this idea of like, you know, projecting your childhood unmet needs onto your partner, or like you said, it could be friends, it could be coworkers, it could be authority figures, it could be all this stuff. So if we're all just kind of like, if you're unconsciously projecting what you didn't get as a child, but you're like an adult, I think that's probably the root of a lot of conflict in general, romantic or otherwise. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is like that idea of like reparenting, like be like healing the 5-year-old inside you, rather than waiting desperately for like somebody to soothe that, you know, child.
Because that's where you can become like codependent, right? I was talking to a friend about this when he was going through quite a rough breakup last year, and he was really badly torn by it. And soon after that, he started dating, like as if the world was going to end in December. And I was like, why? Like, this is not how you normally are. What is going on? And he just thought it was normal. He was like, yeah, I just want to settle down. I was like, no, it's not that. You are trying to forget about your ex-girlfriend, and you're uncomfortable being alone. That's why you want to be out on dates all the time, hoping to find someone. And I think many months later, he realized that was the case, and that actually he didn't want to date, and he doesn't want to find anyone right now. Actually, it's time for him to heal and reflect and realize that you need to feel whole and complete in yourself, and then come together with another person who feels the same, and then you unite together to create whatever you create, the world that you create, which will then come out whole as well. But if you come together as broken individuals, hoping that that person has the solution, you're then dependent on their solution, and that which becomes an addiction. So if they create anything to block that from you, or you've in fear that that person's going to go away, of course you're going to start having these stupid arguments about silly things, but subconsciously you're just scared that the drug that they're giving you is this going to be gone, and then you go and find it in the next person, or you go and find it in the bottle or in the pills, or I don't know. I'm glad that some people are able to have that conversation, because it's hope that actually when we parent our children, the next generation grows up, it can be done a little bit more, with a little bit more love and compassion and light and awareness, so that they can go and make enlightened choices which aren't tainted by trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was a nice way to, well, I don't know. Shall we end it now? Is there anything else? I think I'll keep talking to you. Let me see. I don't write down questions, so I'm just gonna
I
go
know,
with the
I don't
flow.
either.
There was something though. There was something. It's gonna come to me. How did you get into? Because I stalked you a little bit on LinkedIn, so I was like, she's been like Superwoman since the day she graduated, fighting for freedom in every organization she can get into. No, but you've been doing social justice work since the beginning of your I guess career, and you said at the start that you're kind of multitasking and doing these films as outside of work hours, basically. What does that process look like of putting together something like that and then working at the same time, just from, I guess, a lifestyle or emotional point of view? Like, and how does it affect one another? Because when I saw Teacher Soul, I was like, this is just like she's put all her time and effort, or whoever it was, I didn't even know it was you then, but I was like, whoever it was put their time and effort into it, and it must have been a full-time project. They've had a whole team, they've had like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like, and then to know that actually this was just something, it's just a weekend job, like I just did it on the weekend. I was like, what? And it was your first one as well, so it's like super proud to see that it's possible to do something like that on such a big scale, make it look so professional, and put it and then have it be put on a platform like Array and Netflix, etc., which has millions of viewers, for the potential to have impact. So I was just curious around that process from a personal standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the question of my mind right now, how to continue in a sustainable way, because it's not sustainable. It's been, I mean, I got to a point this year where I felt like a ravaged, gutted version of myself, like a shell of myself. But, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to describe because it's like, I don't have answers I just do it. Like, I just do what I want to do. I guess when it comes to career stuff, I have a lot of idealism and sort of confidence. I'm going to make a film. I'm going to do it. Like, I don't know where that comes from, or I'm going to write a book now. Like, I don't know where that comes from. But lifestyle wise, it's challenging because, like, yeah, you're the subject so for me, it's not so much the logistics of juggling a job and a film and myriad other things. It's more the emotional toll that the subject matter has taken. Because, like I said, it's not like I'm like, working at Gap and then going and doing a film about racism. I'm working in conflict and disaster and gender-based violence and rape and, just child, starvation, just these horrific things that I'm reading about and writing about and having to be emotionally engaged in constantly. And I'm trying to like fix racism in America, like, so it's more me learning about how to be a witness, I guess, or to hold space, to be empathic and empathetic, and to have this huge, enormous heart, but not be, exhausted and sick all the time, because when you let that in emotionally, but you don't know how to necessarily process it or discharge it, it starts to make you sick. So that's the point I'm at right now, is like how to keep myself healthy and energized, and it's definitely going to require a pivot, and I think that's where this focus on love is, and I think of the work as like healing work, and so trying to change, I guess, the framing of it. I think if you think of it as sort of social justice, we've got to kind of change everything. Like it's something that no one person can do. It's impossible to be responsible for changing all of the things you want to change in the world. So I think about like Star Wars a lot, because I never watched Star Wars growing up, but I saw the last like one or two, and I thought of this analogy, like, don't fight the darkness, like feed the light. So I think about that, like, how do you minimize your engagement with toxic information, with toxic personalities, with sort of wrestling the dark side? Don't, like, it's more like pull back and give your energy to the things that feel light and feel full of love and feel joy, and the people that support that and feed that as well. So I think you have to be, if you want to engage in this kind of work, you have to kind of be like that, because you see a lot of activists that just rail about things, and they become the energy of the thing they're fighting. Because they look at Trump's Twitter feed and they're outraged all the time, or they like look at these Facebook posts from white supremacists and, they feel crazy and they're just venting and angry all the time. And maybe that's fine for them, but that doesn't work for me. Like, for me, I have to meditate and, and play with my dog and talk to the trees and not look at Trump's Twitter feed and, just all these things to preserve the energy and the sanity I need to do this kind of work. But it's a balancing act always.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a balancing act. I love how you put it in terms of feeding the light and not just constantly fighting in the dark. I guess it's just our journey is to realize that the darkness does exist, but then we can swap and change teams and join the light. But yeah, you're right in saying that activists and even if you're not an activist, you're just a regular person just trying to stay up to date with what's going on. Yeah. You can be feeding into the wrong things, and it's similar to me. Like I'm just, if one thing happens now, I think especially going into the last year or so, that kind of offsets my vibration just by a bit of frustration, this or that. I'm just like, oh no, this is a week of yoga, meditation, eating right, going for a walk. I have to stop speaking to people for a few days, like creating boundaries. And it's just, I don't know, like that's what makes you the type of person to do this type of work then, like to really feel into it at a deeper level, rather than just making it about, I want to rant about all the problems that are going on and show the light and shine the light on that, rather than doing some of the emotional shots and thinking about the color and the filters and all that kind of stuff that you talked about earlier. Like that only comes from someone who thinks, how do we put more heart into this work? It's not just about showing anger and rage and trying to get people to think of it from that perspective, but really it's about connection, and that can only start with yourself, if you're connected to yourself. So it's good that you're spending time on your own now to feed into that. What do you think that journey is going to look like for you, like learning to set boundaries and feed yourself again for a while? Like, is there anything in mind that you have, like I want to spend time doing this or that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm already learning a lot about saying no to things and setting, boundaries and how I use my time. I think it's about, for me, following the signals from my body. Like I'm very,
intuitive.
I'm very intuitive, but I'm also very affected. So everything will manifest in me physically very quickly. So if I'm in an interview with somebody and it's a very painful, traumatic thing they're talking about or whatever, I will probably take on their symptoms, their physical symptoms, or I'll walk out of that interview like aching, physically, not only emotionally, but like physically. So I'm starting to learn that I have to be very aware of my signals from my body. Like if I walk into a space and it's like, ooh, like I instantly feel drained or uncomfortable or whatever, like rather than forcing myself to endure it, I'll get out sooner. So it's like, it's little things like that. It's honoring. I've always had an incredibly strong intuition. You get conditioned to ignore it or to please others and to suppress it. Like, oh, I'm feeling like I really don't want to be around this person, but I have to be super polite and then listen to them like vent to me because I'm a good little girl, like I'm a nice person. And now I'm kind of like, no, I don't need to be around, people. I mean, not in a rude way, obviously, but in like just really sort of protect my personal energy and surround myself with people that make me feel good. And so I think, I hope, the next phase for me, I do want to like have a family and find a partner and all that stuff. So I hope that's my next chapter. That's what I've been really busy with the films, but I feel like I want to like experience home and motherhood and partnership and all that. And so I know that's going to take some slowing down also, because I don't want to be like a stressed out, crazy mother, like I don't want to be externalizing my work stress onto my family life, and so I've been thinking a lot about that, like how to come into balance to allow for that, because I think it will be interesting to be sort of playful and have kids and be happy and still do important work in the world, but from this sort of joyous, magical, happy place too.
Yeah, it's the next chapter of discovering your masculine and feminine energies, right? In a way that you haven't been able to do just yet. So how did your parents and friends react or respond to the work, the films that you've put out?
They love it. I'm very fortunate to have, my family is extremely like-minded. I get my beliefs and views of the world from them. And so and like I said, I've been not only very cognizant of who I surround myself with, but also very lucky in terms of people who come into my life, that I have really, really supportive, loving friends and family and everybody. Like that's another, to your earlier question, that does make the work, as hard as it is, somewhat sustainable. Is like, I have a network, I have community, I have people who care for me, and if my wing is a little broken, they'll help me patch it up. I can always go home. I can always go to someone's house. Like, I'm very, very supported, so that helps a lot. I think we need, but I've also been very intentional about building that, because I know the importance of having support, especially if you're going to do emotionally draining work.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, build your village.
Yeah, exactly. What's been the most emotional scenario you've been in since the beginning of your career? Well, whether that's to do with the films or not, just generally, like, what comes to mind when you think of the most emotional kind of scenario that you faced?
I struggle a lot with my emotional energy gets up to this point. I'm trying to make a change in this, but my emotional energy gets sucked out a lot in the romantic space. Like, I'm able to keep pretty clear-headed in my career, and I have this mission, and I feel this sense of purpose, and I feel so that even when it is very challenging work or hard work or emotionally draining work, it's like I have a North Star, like, in that space. I know what kind of world I want to live in. I know I want to participate in creating that world. I see where humanity needs to go, and the evolution and the changes we need to make and things like that. So it's like, again, I can have very hard conversations where people are talking about very painful things, but I can still see the healing and the transformation in that. So what's been more challenging for me is on the romantic side, and that's probably where I have wasted a lot of my personal energy and personal power, in having, not supportive romantic relationships. I have very supportive like friendships and family, but I've chosen like probably the wrong partners in terms of
someone that wants your attention all the time.
I've just people who are more sort of self-absorbed and not very supportive. I don't know. So that's been hard. So the last few years have been challenging in that sense, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's another tug on your heart, right? Like, so it's difficult when you haven't spent enough time on your own. Like, I've got a friend right now who's going through quite a rough divorce, and I was the best man at his wedding last year, so it is difficult for me to even process that, because I was just blown away. Like, I came back from a retreat in Ireland last year, doing some kind of emotional healing work and stuff, and then a week later it was his wedding. He had to prepare the speech, and I was so excited for it, because he was one of my close friends at university, and then to hear the emotional space he's been in the last few months is insane. And then for them to make the decision to do this, and it's difficult when you haven't got supportive partners or a supportive network around you. But again, I don't think there's a rush in finding that. It's more about feeling whole in yourself and working everything out so that you attract the right person. Because if you're broken, you're just going to attract broken relationships and partnerships and friends and whatnot. So yeah. Well, I mean, I'm super proud of the work that you've done, even though I don't know you that well. I mean, it's the first proper conversation I'm having, but I'm super proud of the work that you've done, and I'm excited to see what else you channel. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to speak. I feel like we'll probably do this again sometime soon to dive into the next chapter of the stuff that comes out of it.
When I write my memoir that comes out.
Yeah. Then we'll say, how has your view on love changed?
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I mean, I think the writing of this is obviously part of my healing process. So
100%. I think writing definitely helps you clarify a lot of things, because it's about you this time. It's not about this world issue. It's you, and it's taking the time to dive into yourself, and and everything that you think and feel just comes out on that piece of paper. So do you journal or anything like that? Or
I mean, I wrote random thoughts down and all these pieces of paper around the place, but I don't have like a process, I don't have a routine, which is interesting. But I've been writing, probably since I was 17, because every time I have a breakup, I write about it. So I'm like, there's a collection of these.
Yeah, it's the best time to write for me anyway. It's the best time to write when you're feeling a little bit emotional, or when you're feeling a sense of connection or depth, and you're just like the realness comes out. And then when people read it, you don't have to think twice about it. They just connect to it immediately, because it goes past the logical mind and goes straight to the heart. And that's I guess that could be the challenge for someone who's super intellectual and likes to break things down and analyze. And I don't know, sometimes you can have a challenge connecting to that space, because you're taught to analyze everything and to think about things and make a plan and structure it and break it down into smaller topics and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, writing just for writing's sake, without structure and free flow, it's there's a sense of freedom in that. But yeah, well, if people want to watch the films you've made and find out more about yourself, what's the best place for them to do that?
Well, I think Teach Us All might have just run up its license on Netflix. I'm not sure.
It did, because I tried to search for it. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure this is where I watched it. Where is it? Like, something wrong with my account, or like?
I think that just happened like a couple weeks ago, and I was so busy. So I don't know, maybe we'll see about putting that up on like iTunes or something. Black Boys is streaming on Peacock, but only in the US. So if you're in the US, it's free to watch on NBC Peacock. And we are also within the next month, it's going to be up on iTunes and Google Play and Amazon and Vudu. And then possibly they'll have international distribution at some point. We're kind of feeling that out, but yeah, hopefully find it.
Nice. No, that's great. So, is there anything that springs to mind? I used to ask all these questions at the end, like about the legacy you want to leave behind and all that kind of stuff. But my headspace is not in that area anymore, and I don't think it's the right type of question to ask anymore. But if there were any final words that are important to you, what would you want to share with people right now?
Oh no. I feel like I've overshared already. like I'm talking about my relationships.
It doesn't have to be anything. I mean, it could be a word that comes to you that's important right now, a thought, a sentence, or maybe nothing, silence.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the films, I hope, speak for themselves. I do think the this theme of love, and then I also think of like listening. I think to slow down and listen deeply. I mean, that's something that came through in Black Boys. I think that's something that's through in my life right now, is just how do we listen more? I think we all got really good at like talking over each other, and sucking the air out of the room and having our opinions. But how do we like really really hear each other? That's actually a skill I don't have, like in terms of my in relationships. That's why I think probably what's been a big challenge, is it's really hard to hear somebody else, especially when you're emotionally triggered. So whether it's romantically, whether it's a conversation about race or sexism or climate change or politics or somebody who doesn't see things the way you do, or whether it's your parents or your partner or your children, like how do we listen more and talk a little less, maybe?
So yeah, I love that message, and it's applicable to everyone, regardless of where you are in the world and regardless of what situation you find yourself in. And one thing that actually came up for me as you were talking is so that's something that I had to learn, and I learned over the last year, was holding space for someone can usually say more than words can. And it counts a lot more, just to give that sense of respect enough to just be silent and to absorb what they're saying and give them a chance to speak. I guess that silence almost serves as a platform for them to speak. Like, here, it's your time to talk. I'm not gonna judge you. You don't need a solution. Sometimes you just want someone to listen to you. Actually, I was speaking to my mom a few weeks ago. It was just me and her, and it was some